The studio lights dimmed as the familiar theme music of the Doctor. Phil's show faded into silence. The audience sat in rapt attention, sensing that today's episode would be different from anything they had witnessed before. On stage, two men in their mid-40s sat side by side, their physical differences striking despite having been raised as brothers. Michael Patterson, tall with sandy blonde hair and green eyes, clutched a worn leather briefcase on his lap. Beside him, Thomas Patterson, shorter with dark brown hair and brown eyes, stared straight ahead with a mixture of anxiety and anticipation etched across his face. Doctor. Phil McGraw walked onto the stage with his characteristic confident stride, but something in his demeanor suggested he knew this case would test even his decades of experience. The weight of what was about to unfold hung heavy in the air. He took his seat across from the two men, leaning forward with his hands clasped together. "Gentlemen, welcome to the show, Doctor." Phil began, his voice steady but compassionate. "Michael, you reached out to us with what you described as the most devastating discovery of your life. You told our producers that 6 months ago, your mother passed away, and in her final instructions, she left you something that has turned your entire world upside down. Tell me what's going on." Michael's hands trembled as he touched the briefcase. His voice cracked as he began to speak. "Doctor. Phil, my mother, Catherine Patterson, died of cancer last April. She was the glue that held our family together. Growing up, Thomas and I always joked about how different we looked, how we didn't share any interests, how we were complete opposites. But we never questioned it because Mom and Dad loved us equally, treated us the same. We were brothers, and that was that." Thomas nodded, his jaw clenched tight. The tension between them was palpable, but it wasn't hostility, it was shared trauma, the kind that comes from having your entire identity questioned. The weeks after the funeral, Michael continued, his voice growing shakier. "I was going through Mom's belongings, and I found a safety deposit box key taped to the bottom of her jewelry box. There was a note with it, written in her handwriting. It said, 'Michael, when you find this, take Thomas and go to First National Bank, box 147. Open it together, but only in the presence of someone you both trust to help you through what's inside. I'm sorry. I love you both more than life itself.'" The audience gasped collectively. "Doctor." Phil's expression darkened with concern. "And did you open it?" "No," Michael said quickly, shaking his head. "I couldn't. The note terrified me. I showed it to Thomas, and we didn't know what to do. We were afraid of what we might find. For 3 months, that key sat in my drawer. We couldn't sleep. We couldn't focus on our families. Finally, I contacted your show because we need someone to help us face whatever truth Mom kept from us." Phil turned to Thomas. "Thomas, what's going through your mind right now?" Thomas's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "I'm angry, Phil. I'm angry at my mother for keeping secrets. I'm terrified that everything I thought I knew about my life is a lie. Michael and I, we've had our differences over the years, but he's my brother. He's always been my brother. What if that changes today? What if the truth destroys us? And you brought the contents of that safety deposit box here today, Doctor?" Phil asked, his gaze fixed on the briefcase in Michael's lap. "We did," Michael confirmed. "We went to the bank yesterday with your producer. We took everything out, but we haven't looked inside any of it. It's all sealed. There are envelopes, documents, and this." He carefully lifted the briefcase and opened it, revealing a small, antique metal safe, no bigger than a showbox, with a combination lock. This was inside the deposit box. "There's a piece of paper with the combination, but we haven't opened it yet. We wanted to do it here, with you, like Mom asked." The camera zoomed in on Dr. Phil's face, and for a moment, even he seemed at a loss for words. He studied both men carefully, then looked at the safe sitting between them like a ticking time bomb. "Before we continue with this shocking revelation, I need to understand what you're both expecting to find, Doctor," Phil said, standing up and walking over to a table that had been set up on stage. "Michael, Thomas, I want you both to bring this safe over here. We're going to open it together." The brothers stood and walked to the table, Michael carefully placing the safe in the center. They sat on either side of it, with Dr. Phil taking a position at the head of the table where he could see both of their faces and the safe simultaneously. But before we witness what happens when that safe is opened, the narrator's voice smoothly transitioned into the direct address to viewers. Don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to our channel, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss any of Dr. Phil's most powerful moments. Drop a comment below telling us where you're watching from and what you think is inside that safe. Your engagement helps us bring you more life-changing content like this. Now, let's get back to what may be the most emotional moment in Dr. Phil history. Michael, you said you and Thomas have always looked different, always felt like opposites. Has anyone ever questioned whether you were actually biological brothers? Dr. Phil's question cut through the tension like a knife. Michael exhaled slowly. When we were kids, other kids at school would make fun of us. They'd say we couldn't be real brothers because we looked nothing alike. One time, when I was about 12, I asked my dad about it. He got really defensive, almost angry. He said, "You are brothers in every way that matters, and don't you ever forget it." That was the end of the conversation. We never brought it up again. Thomas, same question. Did you ever doubt the biological connection? Thomas wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. Yeah, I doubted it. When I was in college, I took a genetics class, and we did this project where we mapped out our family traits. I couldn't find a single physical characteristic that I shared with Michael, my parents, or anyone in our family tree. I brought it up to Mom one night, and his voice broke. She started crying. She hugged me and said, "You are my son. You will always be my son. DNA doesn't make a family, love does." I never questioned it again after that because I couldn't stand to see her cry. Dr. Phil nodded slowly, his professional demeanor barely masking the emotion that was building. So both of you have suspected for years that something wasn't right, but you buried those suspicions out of love for your parents and each other. Exactly, Michael confirmed. But now Mom's gone, and she left us this. He gestured to the safe. She wanted us to know the truth, but she couldn't tell us while she was alive. Why? What could be so terrible that she couldn't face us with it? The audience was completely silent. Even the camera operators seemed to hold their breath. Dr. Phil reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small piece of paper. Before your mother passed away, she contacted our show. This was about 10 months ago. She sent us a letter, but she made us promise not to read it or share it with you until after she was gone. And you came to us voluntarily. Our producers opened that letter yesterday. He unfolded the paper, and his hands, usually so steady, trembled slightly. In this letter, your mother wrote, "Dr. Phil, by the time my sons come to you, I will be gone. I have carried a secret for 38 years that has eaten away at my soul every single day. I need you to help them understand that I did what I did out of love, not deception. Inside the safe, they will find proof of a mistake I discovered too late to fix, but not too late to love through. Please help them forgive me." Michael's face went pale. Thomas gripped the edge of the table so hard his knuckles turned white. "What does that mean?" Thomas whispered. "What mistake, Doctor?" Phil carefully folded the letter and set it down. "I think we're about to find out. Are you both ready to open this safe?" The brothers looked at each other, decades of shared memories passing between them in a single glance. Finally, they both nodded. Michael pulled out the small piece of paper with the combination from his pocket. His hands shook as he began turning the dial on the safe. The mechanical clicks echoed through the silent studio. Left to 17, right to 33, left to 8, right to 45. The final click seemed to reverberate through every person in the room. Michael hesitated, his hand on the safe's latch. "Dr. Phil, before I open this, I need to say something." He turned to Thomas. "No matter what's inside this box, you're my brother. We've lived our entire lives as brothers, and nothing is going to change that. Do you understand me?" Thomas's face crumpled, and tears began streaming down his face. I know, Michael. I feel the same way. Doctor. Phil's voice was gentle, but firm. "Open the safe, Michael." The latch released with a soft pop. Michael lifted the lid slowly, and the camera zoomed in to capture the contents. Inside were several sealed manila envelopes, each one labeled in elegant handwriting. The top envelope read, "For Dr. Phil's eyes first." Beneath, it were two more envelopes labeled for Michael and for Thomas. At the bottom of the safe was a larger envelope that appeared to contain photographs or documents, and a small velvet jewelry box. Dr. Phil reached for the envelope marked with his name. "Do I have your permission to open this first?" Both men nodded. Unable to speak, Dr. Phil carefully unsealed the envelope and pulled out several pages of handwritten letter. As his eyes scanned the first page, his expression shifted from professional concern to something deeper, shock, pain, and an overwhelming sadness. He read silently for what felt like an eternity while the studio held its collective breath. When he finally looked up, there were tears in his eyes, something the audience had rarely, if ever, witnessed. "Gentlemen," he began, his voice thick with emotion, "your mother's letter explains everything. But before I read this to you, I need to prepare you for what you're about to learn." He paused, gathering himself. "In 1979, both of you were born at Mercy General Hospital in Indianapolis on the same day, September 15th. Your mother, Catherine, gave birth to a healthy baby boy at 6:47 a.m. Another woman, Linda Morrison, gave birth to a healthy baby boy at 7:15 a.m. in the same maternity ward." Thomas interrupted, his voice panicked. "Doctor." "Phil, what are you saying?" "Doctor." Phil held up his hand gently. "Let me finish. Due to a hospital error, a catastrophic failure in their identification procedures, the babies were switched. The infant your mother took home was not the infant she gave birth to, and the infant Linda Morrison took home was not hers either." The studio erupted in gasps and murmurs. Michael stood up abruptly, knocking his chair backward. No, that's not possible. You're saying one of us isn't really a Patterson?" "I'm saying, Doctor," Phil continued carefully, "that Michael is not biologically related to Catherine Patterson. Michael, you are the biological son of Linda Morrison. Thomas, you are Catherine's biological son. You were both switched at birth, taken home by the wrong families." The revelation hung in the air like a nuclear bomb. Michael staggered backward, and Thomas sat frozen in his seat, his mouth open, but no sound coming out. "Doctor." Phil stood and walked around the table to stand between them, one hand on each of their shoulders. "There's more, Doctor," Phil said softly. "Michael, your biological mother, Linda Morrison, she never knew about the switch. She died in a car accident when the child she raised, Catherine's biological son, was only 3 years old. That child ended up in foster care because Linda was a single mother with no family." "Oh my God," Michael breathed. "You're telling me my real mother is dead, and my real brother grew up in foster care while I lived with Thomas's mother?" "I'm telling you, Doctor," Phil said, his voice breaking, "that life dealt both of you an incredibly unfair hand. But your mother, Catherine, she found out about the switch when you were both 7 years old." "What?" Thomas exploded, jumping to his feet. "She KNEW. For 38 years, she KNEW and never told us, Doctor." Phil opened the safe again and pulled out the larger envelope. His hands trembled as he opened it and removed its contents. Inside were the hospital bracelets, yellowed with age, with the names Baby Boy Patterson and Baby Boy Morrison written on them. There were also several official-looking documents, birth certificates, hospital records, and what appeared to be DNA test results. "Your mother commissioned a private DNA test when you were 7 years old because she noticed that Thomas didn't share any of her or your father's physical characteristics. When the results came back, she discovered the truth. But here's what she wrote in her letter. Doctor." Phil's voice cracked as he read aloud. She wrote, "I discovered that the baby I had been raising for 7 years was not mine biologically, and my biological son was out there somewhere. I hired a private investigator and found out that Linda Morrison had died, and my biological child was in the system. I faced an impossible choice, tell the truth and risk losing the son I had raised and loved, or stay silent and never know my biological child." The audience was openly crying now. Michael sank to his knees on the stage floor. Thomas stood rigid, his face a mask of betrayal and anguish. Doctor. Phil pulled out one final item from the envelope, a photograph. It showed a young Catherine Patterson standing outside a foster care facility, tears streaming down her face, staring through a chain-link fence at a small boy playing in a yard. "Your mother went to see her biological son, Doctor," Phil said, his voice barely above a whisper. "This photo was taken by the private investigator. She stood outside that facility for hours, watching him, unable to make herself go inside. And then Doctor. Phil did something that shocked everyone in the studio and millions of viewers who would later watch this episode. He set down the photograph, walked to the front of the stage, and signaled to his producer, "Stop the cameras. Stop filming right now." The stunned producer hesitated. Doctor. Phil's voice, usually so controlled, rose with emotion. "I said stop the cameras. Everyone out. Clear the studio. Now." The audience was ushered out in confused silence. The camera operators lowered their equipment. The bright studio lights dimmed to a softer glow. For the first time in the show's history, Dr. Phil had stopped the taping and cleared the studio. Only he, Michael, Thomas, and two producers remained on the stage. Dr. Phil returned to the table where the brothers sat in stunned silence. He pulled his chair close to theirs and sat down, no longer the television host, but simply a man trying to help the others through the most devastating moment of their lives. I stopped the cameras because what I'm about to tell you doesn't need to be entertainment, Dr. Phil said quietly, wiping his eyes. This is too real, too painful, and too sacred to be captured for television ratings. He reached into the safe and pulled out the two remaining sealed envelopes marked for Michael and for Thomas. He handed each man his respective letter. Your mother wrote each of you a personal letter explaining her choice. But before you read them, I need to tell you the full story, because there's one more piece you don't know. Michael and Thomas clutched their unopened letters, both of them emotionally drained, barely able to process anything more. After your mother discovered the truth and went to see her biological son at the foster facility, she faced her impossible choice. She consulted with lawyers, therapists, and even clergy. Everyone told her that coming forward with the truth would destroy her family, traumatize both children, and possibly result in her losing Thomas, who she had raised and loved as her own for 7 years. But she couldn't abandon her biological child to the system either. Dr. Phil opened the small velvet jewelry box that had been at the bottom of the safe. Inside were two identical gold lockets. So your mother made a choice that I've never seen before in all my years of practice. She worked with social services and adoption agencies, and she adopted her own biological son. She brought him home and raised him as Thomas's brother. She raised both of you, knowing the full truth, loving you both equally, and never telling you because she believed that the love she gave you was more important than the biology that created you. The words hung in the air for a moment before Michael's eyes widened in recognition. Wait, are you saying? I'm saying, Doctor. Phil confirmed, fresh tears rolling down his face, that you are biological brothers after all. Catherine Patterson gave birth to Thomas, and she legally adopted Michael, her biological son, who had been switched at birth. You grew up together because your mother moved heaven and earth to make sure that even though the hospital stole your chance to grow up with your biological family, you still grew up as brothers. She found a way to keep you both. Thomas gasped, his hands flying to his mouth. Michael dropped his mother's letter and stared at Dr. Phil in disbelief. She got me back. She adopted me. She did more than that, Dr. Phil continued, opening one of the lockets to reveal a tiny photograph of two infant boys side by side. She convinced your father to adopt you alongside her. She couldn't tell him the complete truth about the hospital switch. She was terrified he wouldn't understand or would want to expose the hospital, which could have meant losing Thomas in a custody battle. So she told him that you were a child from the foster system who desperately needed a home, and that she felt a special connection to you. Your father fell in love with you immediately and agreed to the adoption. She protected both of you from a truth that could have destroyed your family, while simultaneously refusing to let her biological son grow up without her. Dr. Phil handed them the hospital records, a DNA test. The documents confirmed everything. Thomas was Catherine's biological son, born at 6:47 a.m. Michael was Linda Morrison's biological son, born at 7:15 a.m. But the adoption papers showed that Catherine and her husband had legally adopted Michael when he was 7 years old, bringing him into their family permanently. The reason your mother could never tell you the complete truth, Dr. Phil said softly, was because your father died never knowing about the hospital switch. He knew Michael was adopted, but he believed it was simply an act of charity and compassion, not a desperate mother's attempt to reclaim her biological son. She carried the full secret alone for 38 years, loving you both fiercely, making sure you grew up as true brothers despite the hospital's mistake. She only left these documents for you now because she wanted you to know that your bond isn't just circumstantial, it's the result of her deliberate, sacrificial choice to keep you together. Michael opened his letter with shaking hands and began to read. His mother's handwriting was clear despite the emotional weight of the words. My dearest Michael, if you are reading this, I am gone, and you finally know the truth. You are my son, not because I gave birth to you, but because I chose you. When I discovered what the hospital had done, I could have exposed the truth and torn the families apart. Instead, I fought for 2 years to bring you home where you belonged. You and Thomas are brothers because I made you brothers. Biology failed you, but love didn't. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you while I was alive. I hope you can forgive me for keeping this secret, but I would make the same choice 1,000 times over if it meant you grew up with the love and family you deserved. You are mine, and you always have been. Love, Mom." Thomas read his own letter, tears flowing freely. His mother had written similar words, thanking him for being patient with a brother who sometimes felt like a stranger, explaining that she had deliberately chosen to adopt Michael, to give Thomas a brother, to keep the family that fate had tried to destroy together. 2 hours later, after countless tears, embraces, and healing conversations, Dr. Phil made the decision to turn the cameras back on for one final segment. Michael and Thomas sat together on the couch, their arms around each other, their eyes red from crying, but their faces peaceful in a way they hadn't been when the show started. Phil took his seat across from them, and the audience was brought back in silently. The mood in the studio had shifted from anticipation to reverence. Everyone sensed they had witnessed something extraordinary. "Gentlemen," Dr. Phil began, his voice steady now, but still carrying the weight of emotion. "We've been off camera for over 2 hours. Can you tell the audience what happened during that time?" Michael spoke first, his voice strong despite his emotional exhaustion. "We learned the truth about our mother. We learned that she was the most remarkable, selfless woman either of us could have ever hoped to have. She didn't just love us despite the circumstances, she fought for us. She made choices that most people could never make, and she did it all silently, without asking for credit or recognition." Thomas added, "We spent the last 2 hours reading her letters, looking at photos she had kept of our childhood, and talking about memories we thought we understood, but now see in a completely different light. Every time she hugged us extra tight, every time she told us that family is a choice, every time she made sure we stayed close even when we fought, it all makes sense now. She was protecting the family she built from the ashes of the hospital's mistake." Dr. Phil leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his hands clasped together. "I stopped the cameras and cleared the studio because I realized we were witnessing something that transcended television. We were witnessing the revelation of a mother's ultimate sacrifice, her choice to carry a devastating secret alone for 38 years, so that her sons could grow up as brothers, unburdened by knowledge that might have torn them apart." He turned to face the camera directly, his eyes glistening. "I've been doing this show for over 20 years. I've seen families destroyed by secrets, marriages torn apart by lies, and children damaged by the truth. But today, I witnessed something different. I saw a secret that wasn't about deception. It was about protection. Your mother, Thomas Patterson, discovered that her biological son was in foster care and the son she had raised wasn't biologically hers, and instead of destroying their lives with the truth, she quietly adopted her biological son and raised both of you as brothers, knowing that one day you would discover the truth, but hoping it wouldn't be until you were strong enough to understand her choice." Dr. Phil's voice grew stronger, more passionate. "I stopped the filming because some moments are too sacred for entertainment. Some truths are too profound to be reduced to a television segment. But I brought you back on camera for this final message because I believe the world needs to hear it. Family is not defined by biology. Family is defined by choice, by sacrifice, by the daily decision to show up and love even when it's hard, even when it costs you something, even when you have to carry burdens alone." He stood up and walked over to the brothers, placing a hand on each of their shoulders. "Your mother made an impossible choice, and she made it out of love. She could have reclaimed her biological son and abandoned the son she had raised, or she could have stayed silent and let her biological son remain in foster care. Instead, she found a third way, the hardest way. She brought you both home and loved you equally, completely, and sacrificially for 38 years. Michael and Thomas stood and embraced Dr. Phil, all three men openly crying. The audience rose to their feet in a standing ovation that lasted several minutes. Dr. Phil wiped his eyes and turned back to the camera one final time. Thomas Patterson's story is a reminder that sometimes the greatest act of love is silence. Sometimes the strongest thing a parent can do is carry a burden alone so their children don't have to. Michael and Thomas asked me why their mother couldn't face them with the truth while she was alive, and now we know it wasn't because she was ashamed. It was because she was protecting the family she had fought so hard to keep together. She waited until she was gone because she knew that only then, when they were mature adults with families of their own, would they be able to understand the magnitude of her sacrifice and the depth of her love. He paused, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. I stopped the cameras today because I needed these men to hear the truth. Without the pressure of performance, without the weight of an audience's judgment, I needed them to process the most important revelation of their lives in private, with dignity, and with the space to feel everything they needed to feel. That's why I cleared this studio. That's why I halted production. Because some truths are too important to be rushed, too sacred to be entertainment, and too profound to be anything less than life-changing. Phil returned to his chair and looked directly into the camera. If you're watching this and you're carrying a secret, ask yourself, am I keeping this secret out of love or out of fear? Am I protecting someone or protecting myself? Thomas Patterson kept her secret out of pure, sacrificial love. She gave up her right to be acknowledged, her right to be understood, and her right to be praised for her incredible sacrifice, so that her sons could have the childhood they deserved. That's not deception. That's heroism. The camera zoomed in on Michael and Thomas, still holding each other, their faces reflecting peace, understanding, and a profound gratitude for the mother who had loved them enough to bear the unbearable alone. For Michael and Thomas, Dr. Phil concluded, the journey doesn't end here. They have a lifetime of reframing memories, understanding their mother's choices and honoring her legacy, but they're doing it together, as brothers, not because biology made them brothers, but because their mother's love did. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the most powerful family story I have ever witnessed. The show ended not with Dr. Phil's usual call to action or preview of the next episode, but with a simple dedication that appeared on the screen in memory of Thomas Patterson, a mother whose love transcended biology, whose sacrifice demanded silence, and whose legacy will live forever in the brothers she refused to let the world separate. The screen faded to black, leaving audiences around the world in tears, reminded that the truest definition of family has nothing to do with DNA and everything to do with the choice to love unconditionally, even when that love requires carrying impossible burdens alone.